Amidst the chaos of Christ's arrest, his disciples fled into hiding. Then, abandoned and seemingly defenseless, Jesus was taken back into the city to face his accusers as the fulfillment of messianic prophecy accelerated.
For wicked and deceitful men have opened their mouths against me. They have spoken against me with lying tongues.
On Friday morning, Jesus was subjected to 2 trials, one Jewish and religious, the other Roman and secular. In the first, many believe he was led up these steps to the home of the high priest, where he was interrogated by a hastily convened meeting of the Sanhedrin, the supreme Jewish council.
He knows from the prophecies that he has to be crucified, and that means he's got to be turned over to the Roman authorities. The Jews don't have the authority under Roman government to crucify anybody. They may on occasion stone somebody to death, as they do later with Stephen. But the prophecies are not that the Messiah is going to be stoned to death, but that he's going to be pierced and nailed through. So in order for that to be fulfilled, you have the illegitimate trial that takes place in the middle of the night, trying to get him condemned as a heretic so that they can take him the next morning to Pilate and say, this man is such a blasphemer, he deserves to die.
Christ's trial before the Sanhedrin began with the testimony of several false witnesses. Each failed to present a convincing reason to crucify him. Finally, Caiaphas, the high priest, confronted Jesus.
The high priest asked him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?" "I am," said Jesus, "and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One, and coming in the clouds of heaven."
Contrary to popular opinion, this Son of Man title is not a merely human title. The way it's used by Jesus, it's a claim to messiahship. He claims to be a co-regent on God's throne, sitting at the right hand of God, coming in the clouds, which in the Old Testament is a reference only to God, and coming in judgment. That combination of claims gets the proclamation and mark that he's a blasphemer.
Christ claimed that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. And that is one of the primary reasons that the religious leaders wanted to crucify him, because he made himself equal with God.
You blasphemers!
The high priest then tore his clothes. "Why do you need any more witnesses? You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" And they all condemned him as worthy of death.
Lacking the legal authority to crucify Jesus, the high priest ordered that he be taken to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, and a pivotal figure in the fulfillment of the prophecies of the Passion. The Sanhedrin's decision to send Jesus to Pilate, a verdict that assured almost certain execution, stunned Judas Iscariot.
Judas was seized with remorse and returned the 30 silver coins to the chief priests. "I have sinned," he said. "I have betrayed innocent blood." Then he threw down the pieces of silver in the temple.
Like other key events in the Passion story, Judas's return of the price of Christ's betrayal had been predicted by the prophet Zechariah centuries earlier.
So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord.
Beyond the southern wall of Jerusalem, the Hinnom Valley remains a testimony to the night of Christ's arrest and trial, and the fulfillment of messianic prophecy. After Judas angrily returned the silver he had been paid, the high priest used the money to buy a small parcel of this land. There, the clay used to make the temple pottery was once excavated, so it was called the Potter's Field.
And the Lord said, "Throw it to the potter," that handsome price at which they valued me. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord, to the potter.
God is a stickler for detail. We see this from Genesis to Revelation. And it's very important to God that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. And I think he wanted us to see that in the death of Jesus, it was exactly as the Old Testament prophets had said it would be.
For the mouths of the wicked have opened against me.
At daybreak, Jesus was taken to the halls of the Roman Praetorium to stand trial before Pontius Pilate. The Jewish religious leaders wanted Pilate to order his immediate execution.
We know from ancient writings that Pilate, he's not the kind of person who is slow to hand somebody over to death. He's not somebody who, oh boy, I don't know what to do. I'd really rather not kill this guy. I don't want to shed blood innocently. I don't think that's Pilate. Perhaps Pilate genuinely did see that this man was not worthy of death on political grounds that the Jews were claiming. And if there's a spiritual thing here, if you guys say he's offended your law, well, then you take him and try him. That's not my issue.
So Pilate asked the Jews, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." But the Jews objected. "We have no right to execute anyone."
In an attempt to free himself from the responsibility of judgment, Pontius Pilate sent Jesus to Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee, who was in Jerusalem for the Passover. However, like Pilate, Herod had little interest in condemning Jesus to death, and was instead content to humiliate him.
Herod plied him with many questions, but Jesus gave him no answer. Then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him, and dressing him in an elegant robe, they sent Jesus back to Pilate.
Of all the prophetic scriptures, perhaps none is more important than the 53rd chapter of Isaiah. This remarkable vision of the future, written in approximately 700 BC, has been called the cornerstone of Messianic prophecy.
It was so powerful that when Isaiah received the vision, that he said, nobody's going to believe it. That's how he starts. This whole prophecy shook his inner being because God has given him a complete picture and detailed description of what Messiah is going to look like, what he's going to do, and how he's going to die. And I mean, there are other prophecies that come together with that, but this is really the central column of Messianic prophecies.
The accuracy of Isaiah's prophetic vision is underscored in the biblical accounts of Christ's trial before Pontius Pilate.
By arrest and judgment, he was taken away.
We know historically that Pilate was walking on eggshells with the Jewish people. He had had some earlier confrontations with them, and he did not need another confrontation. I think if it was within his power and he was not already in a conflicted situation with the Jewish people, he would have released Jesus. But because if he had one more incident, it could be a riot, he had to do something. Again, God was behind the scenes orchestrating these events.
In their second encounter, Pilate interrogated Jesus alone in his chambers.
Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. but it is from another place. For this reason I came into the world to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me.
Stunned by the power of Christ's response, Pilate turned away to address the crowd that had gathered in the courtyard of the Praetorium.
I find no basis for a charge against him, Pilate said. What shall I do then with Jesus who is called the Christ? They all answered, Crucify him.
Despite the Jews' rejection of his appeal for mercy, Pilate made another desperate attempt to save Jesus from the cross. He ordered that Christ be beaten and scourged.
He was led like a lamb to the slaughter.
People in the ancient world understood what a Roman flogging was like, and that it was a horrendous beating that left Jesus in hypovolemic shock, which is shock because of great blood loss.
Normally that meant 40 lashes less one for mercy. 39 lashes with the Roman whip, with the cat of nine tails, with broken pieces of metal and glass in the whip to rip the flesh open.
And so it would rip into the skin, then it would rip into the skeletal tissue. Many men did not survive the actual scourging process, but again, even that was a fulfillment of Scripture.
With each lash of the Roman whip, Isaiah's predictions of a Messiah beaten mercilessly for the sins of all humanity were graphically fulfilled.
I offered my back to those who beat me, my cheeks to those who pulled out my beard. I did not hide my face from mocking and spitting. And by his stripes we are healed.